November 12, 1944, 8:47 a.m. The morning mist clings to Tromsk fjord like a burial shroud. Inside the battleship Tirpitz, able seaman Werner Hirsch stands at his battle station in Tirpitz, hands pressed against steel that's cold enough to burn. He can hear the low thrum of the ventilation system, the metallic ping of rivets contracting in the Arctic air. Somewhere above, beyond 16 inches of Krupp-cemented armor, beyond the 3-layer torpedo bulkheads, beyond what the Kriegsmarine engineers promised was the most sophisticated defense system, welded to a warship, the air raid sirens begin their wail. Hirsch isn't afraid. How could he be? The Tirpitz had survived everything the Royal Air Force threw at her. 12 major attacks, hundreds of sorties, thousands of bombs. The lonely Queen of the North had become a fortress not through her guns, but through her ability to simply absorb punishment. Every intelligence briefing confirmed it. Conventional ordnance couldn't penetrate her citadel. The mathematics of armor were on Germany's side. But here's the paradox that would rewrite the physics of war. In exactly 4 minutes, Werner Hirsch and 900 men would die not because their armor failed, but because the ground beneath them would betray the very laws they thought protected them. This isn't a story about heroism. This is an analysis of the moment when the old war of steel and courage died, and the new war of applied physics was born. Because in 1944, the British didn't need to break through the Tirpitz's armor. They just needed to turn the Earth itself into a weapon. To understand how impossible the Tirpitz seemed, you need to understand what she actually was. 52,600 tons of displacement. A main belt of armor ranging from 12.6 to 14.1 inches of face-hardened steel, angled at 13 degrees to deflect shells like water off a sloped roof. A citadel, the armored box protecting magazines and machinery, was a fortress within a fortress. Horizontal armor deck, 4.7 inches of Wotan Hart steel. Torpedo bulkheads, 5 separate compartments designed to absorb the expansion of underwater explosions, each one a maze of void spaces and oil-filled cells that could drink the energy of a detonation and disperse it harmlessly. The engineers at Bloom and Voss hadn't just built a ship. They'd built a problem for Allied planners. Because the Tirpitz, even sitting stationary in Norwegian fjords, was what strategists called a fleet in being. She didn't need to sail to win. Her mere existence tied down the British home fleet, forced convoy routes hundreds of miles out of the way, created a strategic black hole that swallowed resources like a gravitational well. Winston Churchill understood this better than anyone. He called her the beast and obsessed over her destruction. But obsession doesn't break 16 inches of armor. The Royal Air Force tried. God knows they tried. Operation Tungsten, April 1944, 40 Barracuda dive bombers screaming down through flak, so thick it looked like a steel curtain. Direct hits recorded. The Tirpitz's superstructure shredded. 122 German sailors killed. And when the smoke cleared, the armor belt hadn't been scratched. The engines were intact. The main battery could still fire. The problem was fundamental. A standard 500-pound bomb dropped from 10,000 feet reaches a terminal velocity of roughly 750 feet per second. Even with armor-piercing caps, even with perfect perpendicular impact, the kinetic energy dissipates across the surface area of the strike. The armor, designed specifically to resist this kind of attack, does exactly what it's supposed to do. It holds. This was the old war, the war of bigger bombs versus thicker armor. The war of brave men in dive bombers trading their lives for hits that mathematically could not achieve penetration. It was industrial age attrition. And the Tirpitz was winning by simply existing. But in a workshop at Burr Hill in Surrey, a man named Barnes Wallis was asking a different question. Not how do we hit harder, but what if we're hitting the wrong thing entirely? Before we get to Wallis's solution, you need to understand the nightmare of failures that preceded it. because the path to the Tirpitz was paved with wreckage. September 1943. Operation Source. This is where the old war mentality reached its most desperate extreme. 6 X-craft midget submarines, each one 48 feet long and barely 6 feet in diameter. Inside, 4 men and 2 tons of Amatex explosive charges. The plan was conceptually simple: navigate 1,200 miles of Nazi-occupied waters, penetrate Kafjord's anti-submarine nets, place charges beneath the Tirpitz's keel, escape before detonation. Listen to how leading seaman Bob Aitken described the interior of X6. You couldn't stand upright. Couldn't turn around without pressing against another man. The air recyclers hummed constantly, but after 6 hours submerged, you were breathing soup thick with diesel fumes, battery acid vapor, and human sweat. The condensation ran down the hull in streams. Everything was wet, everything smelled of oil and fear. Of the 6 X-craft that departed, only to reach the Tirpitz, X6 and X7 navigated through minefields, avoided destroyer patrols, cut through 4 separate anti-torpedo nets with tools that kept jamming. Lieutenant Donald Cameron in X6 fought a periscope that wouldn't retract, a gyro compass that failed, and a depth gauge that gave readings off by 30 feet. For 11 hours, he piloted blind through a fjord, where one navigational error meant detonating against a cliff face. They succeeded in placing the charges for 2-ton mines, each containing enough explosive to crack a destroyer's spine, positioned directly beneath the Tirpitz's machinery spaces. The detonation lifted the 52,600-ton battleship 5 feet out of the water. Shockwaves traveled through the keel, buckling plates, shattering light fixtures, throwing men against bulkheads. In the engine rooms, the massive turbine mountings cracked. Electrical systems failed across 3 decks, and the armor, untouched. The torpedo defense system, designed to absorb exactly this kind of underwater blast, had performed flawlessly. The Tirpitz was damaged, yes, crippled for months, absolutely. But her citadel remained impenetrable. Her structural integrity was fundamentally intact. The courage displayed was extraordinary. Cameron received the Victoria Cross, but courage cannot overcome physics. The old war had shown its limitations again. You cannot defeat engineering with bravery alone. The lesson the Admiralty learned was brutal. Conventional explosives, no matter how courageously delivered, could not achieve the type of destruction needed. You could damage the Tirpitz. You could inconvenience her, but you couldn't kill her. The slaughterhouse of failed attempts continued. Operation Planet in April 1944, 27 Lancasters dropping standard bombs. Results: superficial damage. Operation Brawn in May. No significant hits. Operation Tiger Claw in July, with a forced abortion. Operation Mascot in August. 44 aircraft. Heavy flak, minimal damage. Each failure reinforced the same truth. The Tirpitz existed in a protected geological trap, shielded by mountains, obscured by smoke generators, surrounded by enough anti-aircraft guns to create a kill zone that extended 3 miles in every direction. Getting to her was one problem. Hurting her was another problem entirely. By autumn 1944, the strategic calculus was clear. The only way to neutralize the Tirpitz was to sink her. And sinking her required a weapon that didn't yet exist in any Air Force's arsenal. Enter Barnes Wallis and the concept of the earthquake bomb.